Welcome to Alt Speaking, the podcast that dives into the cutting-edge world of longevity science and the brilliant minds driving it forward. Today, I had the pleasure of chatting with Lou Reese, Chairman of the Board of Vaxxinity. Not only is Lou a client of KCSA's, he's also become truly a good friend of mine over the past year or so. Lou, alongside his wife and Vaxxinity's CEO, Mei Mei Hu, co-founded the company and have been steering it since 2014. He is also part of the executive committee at UBI, a multinational biopharmaceutical organization dedicated to the development of diagnostic and immunotherapies for the improvement of global health. He's also been a part of the executive committee at UBI, a multinational biopharmaceutical organization dedicated to the development of diagnostics and immunotherapeutics for the improvement of global health. And Lou has served as a director at ShenLian Biotech, one of the largest and most influential animal health companies in the world. Beyond biotech, Lou co-founded an investment firm with ventures in real estate, energy, hospitality, and also life sciences, and they are all aimed at creating global impact through innovative strategies. Lou is the single most transparent person I know. He truly wears his heart and his beliefs on his sleeve. He's funny, fun, and he is genuinely a mensch. Often Lou embarks on projects just because he thinks they'll be hilarious, which is his way of saying fun, important, surprising, and most importantly, impactful. This is a man who has dedicated his life to ending suffering in the world. Despite spending most of his career behind the scenes and maintaining a minimal digital footprint, Lou knows everyone. Everyone, from the Pope to Kanye, from Shepard Fairey to MBS and MBZ. His connections are vast, and yet his influence is quietly profound. Recently, Vaxxinity made strides with its vaccines or active immunotherapies. Their phase 1 trial for Parkinson's vaccine was published in Nature Medicine, probably the most influential medical journal in the country, and showed promising results demonstrating safety and, most importantly, a robust immune response targeting pathological alpha-synuclein. Additionally, Vaxxinity is advancing its dementia and Alzheimer's vaccine, having completed phase 2 trials with positive results and showing potential to slow cognitive decline and improve the quality of life for patients. Basically, we are potentially looking at an end to dementia. They are now gearing up to launch phase 3 trials, which could bring this groundbreaking treatment closer to widespread use. It was truly an honor to talk with Lou about Vaxxinity's groundbreaking work and his unique approach to making a difference. So without further ado, here's my conversation with my friend and somebody who I look up to, Lou Reese. This is just a conversation. I got lots of questions. The goal here for the podcast is to explain to people what's going on in the longevity space. I think one of the reasons why you and I get along so well is we both have a real deep, abiding love of words. Yeah. Words matter. And, they define, the way that we perceive the world. The word spelling at its core has the word spell in it. And it's because however it was thought of, the idea that the way that we, the way that we think is completely shaped by the way we speak.
It's the casting of spells, right?
100%. It is the casting of spells. So, vaccine used to be a word to conjure with from a positive perspective. It has since lost a lot of its power and almost all of its positive mojo, at least in the United States. Vaxxinity is a company that is creating vaccines, but when you think about the word vaccine, what does that conjure for you?
So I think of our platform as the AIM platform, which is an active immunotherapy medicine. And that's similar to vaccines, but what it really is a long-acting biologic that's more convenient, more accessible, and opens up additional epitope design or additional target selection. So you can go after multiple things that cause diseases at once. So that's what makes it kind of highly disruptive. When I think about vaccines, to be honest, it makes me sad. It's one of the 3 inventions in the world, and you can add kind of antibacterials in there as well. So you can add antibiotics and vaccines, because that was kind of the same movement. And that, along with the green revolution in agriculture and the discovery of hygienic plumbing, are the only 3 things that have ever affected billions of people.
Yeah, I mean, vaccines didn't become widespread until the late 1700s, and then they really took off with the smallpox vaccine and Jonas Salk. Before that, you had smallpox, polio, measles, whooping cough. They killed millions of people. Mumps. When those were widespread, the average lifespan was 30 to 40 years. Right. Now our lifespan, with the reasons you gave, and also mostly vaccines, human lifespan now averages around 70 years, and you can put aside the dip recently to COVID, but vaccines are in large part what has basically doubled human lifespan. But historically, vaccines have only targeted infectious diseases. You guys are doing something fundamentally different. Talk about what Vaxxinity is doing in targeting chronic disease versus infectious disease.
Yeah, so we're the world's experts in breaking immune tolerance. And what that means is that the body, for the very first time in human history, just a few years ago, and this counts COVID, by the way, things that are chronic illnesses, so Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, heart attack, stroke, so that's high cholesterol, hypercholesterolemia, sarcopenia, osteoporosis, those are actually the things that are killing us more, cancers that are killing us more than all external factors. So starvation, war, pestilence, bacteria, viruses, all of that shit used to kill us. And now that's not what is killing us in bulk. So the enemy has changed. That enemy has been neutralized, and now we're in this whole other enemy, and the enemy is us. So in order to fight those things, which are fundamentally your immune system doing something wrong, something that it shouldn't do, whether it's not pruning the metastatic cancer cells, whether it's not clearing cholesterol effectively, or creating a buildup that's excessive of certain types of cholesterol, like the softer cholesterols, for example. LDL-C would be the one that is the main culprit there. So those are the number 1 targets, and those are exactly what we're going after. And we're the first company that has a platform, the active immunotherapy medicines platform, that in animals or humans has ever licensed a vaccine, ever, or a treatment against a chronic or endogenous target. And in that case, it was LHRH for immunocastration in pigs, but it's also going to be Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MSA, hypercholesterolemia, migraine, sarcopenia, osteoporosis, and a host of others, right? And the way that we identified those targets was based on suffering. And because most of the suffering is allocated to those exact areas, the largest spend in the world is Alzheimer's, period. The fastest growing neurodegenerative disease is Parkinson's, right? The number 1 killer, since humans have been keeping track as an individual thing, has been heart attack and stroke. So we're literally going after the biggest things on the planet. If you look at cholesterol, right? Why am I going after migraine? Okay, I'm doing it because my math and my logic. So this is a Lewism. Says that the majority of the disparity in pay between men and women in the OECD is attributable directly to migraine. It's the number 1 cause of missed days of work and the number 1 cause of missed days of university for women. So over 70% of migraineurs are women. It's higher in severe migraineurs. So it's even worse in the debilitating migraines.
What, migraine what?
Migraineurs, people who suffer migraine.
Oh, okay. I've just not heard that word before.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a word.
You know what? It is now.
It better be.
It is now. It's a word I've never heard that before.
Yeah. So these people that are like, it's an unbelievable handicap, right? And if you talk to large places of employment, those missed days of work, not necessarily specifically broken down for migraine and blah, 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 but the missed days of work, sick days, are one of the number 1 reasons people do not get promoted. So like this is right in line with why there is a 12 to 20% disparity in income, for the same jobs. So I think this is an equality play for women. That's why migraines matter, and I think that's a global issue. So I think that's a thing everywhere that we can address, which is amazing. And so the idea is what are we doing? We're going after those very elements as the leaders in breaking immune tolerance. We are effectively tricking the body into doing what it was supposed to be doing anyway, which is taking care of these toxic elements that are causing chronic disease.
You're not the only company in the world that does research into vaccines, but what you are doing is fundamentally different. Your science is fundamentally different than almost every other company in the world. You are using synthetic peptide technology. That's a mouthful, but it's really interesting. Can you explain what that is, right? Because everybody, basically the entire world has heard of mRNA thanks to the COVID vaccine. You have your own COVID vaccine, but it's not based on mRNA, it's based on synthetic peptides. Talk a little bit about what those are and why they are a huge and fundamental game changer, not only for Vaxxinity, but for the entire concept of creating cures for people.
Yeah, so the platform, although is unique in its ability to tackle chronic and endogenous targets, has also been applied very effectively to exogenous targets, so to foreign targets, so traditional vaccine targets like COVID. In another world, in one of our companies, we vaccinate over 25% of all the pigs in the world against a variety of different things, but the largest population of the pigs are vaccinated against something called foot and mouth disease. And what's interesting about that, and I'll talk about COVID, so it applies to both. In that instance, we've made literally over 5 billion doses of that have been distributed around the world, and we still make about 600 million doses a year. So the idea is synthetic peptides on a whole are chemistry mimicking biology. So very much we put the tech in biotech, meaning that instead of extremely expensive mechanical systems, giant reactors, billion-dollar plants to serve 1 million patients a year, it's a real number, we can take a plant and for $250 million, we can make literally hundreds of millions of vaccines in that plant every year for patients, right? Billions of vaccines, actually. And the idea is that the scalability of that is totally different. The traditional vaccines, and this is before talking about mRNA as a specific one, were made in eggs. So you had factories with millions and millions of eggs kept at a certain temperature to grow a virus in the egg.
They're chicken eggs.
Yeah, chicken eggs. Millions and millions of them. Fucking football fields of them. And like these, and they had to be perfectly clean. And if any one of them got contaminated with a bacteria, all of them had to be thrown out. Right? So it was like really, really challenging manufacturing processes. Right? And we don't have to do that because we're not growing a real virus. You're not making the actual thing. We, in effect, draw a beautiful picture of the virus out of the synthetic peptides. So they have no reactivity in your body on their own. And yet, when they're presented in that way, they look like the virus enough that the body generates antibodies against them that are highly specific. So that's the concept behind fully synthetic. It's chemistry to mimic biology. It's the drawing of the object, not the object itself. So the safety level of that, to put it in perspective, in the United States, the only place that can have foot and mouth disease vaccines is Plum Island. It's that controlled. In China, we manufacture 600 million doses of this vaccine a year for foot and mouth disease inside of Shanghai City because it's completely inert.
And if it got out, it wouldn't get anybody sick.
It can't get out. It's inert.
Yeah.
It's not alive. There's no thing to infect anyone.
Yeah, there's no it.
Yeah, there is no it. It would be like saying that someone stole the Eiffel Tower because they drew a painting of it. And so there isn't an it. It's the inert nature of it is what is so disruptive, and that's also what makes it so safe. When you're going after diseases that are chronic or mass population issues, right? Now we'll talk about mRNA. The reason people don't trust vaccines is because we don't give them real information about the vaccines. And when people do provide real information, they're made fun of by mainstream media and by like very specific groups that are paid by those exact companies to target them. Right? Like look at what they spend every year on PR and look at what they spend on lobbying, and then tell me that goes nowhere. Right? The answer is that these are like malicious and horrible, like behemoths that operate in a malicious and horrible way. And people get tricked by it. So I'm not an anti-vaxxer, and I'm not a pro-vaxxer. I'm a pro-data person. So I believe that people need transparent access to data so they can make the right decisions.
You're also somebody who's anti-suffering, right? I mean, the whole thesis of what you are doing is to eliminate or at least limit suffering. So if vaccines can help do that, if AIM can do that, then that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about, there's no other purpose to any of it. It's, the idea is that a lot of people struggle every day, right? Like I have friends that are partners at huge firms and banks or law firms or whatever, and they're like, man, I just can't wait. In another 20 years, I'm gonna retire and do what I wanna do. And they're gonna be 65, right? Mm-hmm. And they're planning to do what they want to do then. Let me tell you what that looks like, right? There's a guy that I met in Telluride that was a partner at a large law firm, and he finally got to do what he wanted to do. Now he's, overweight, old, and trying to learn how to ski better. And that's what he wanted to do his whole life. And he never just did it for a year or 2 years or 5 years. And so what does this mean? To me, it means that the reason that people wake up and they put on their shoes and they brush their teeth and they take the kids to school and they do the things they're supposed to do is because that's just what they do. But the reason they're unhappy doing it is because they're devoid of purpose. Mm-hmm. And I have a different problem, right? So my wake up number is like a 3 or a 4 every day, right? It's not a 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. or any of that shit. It's like starts with a 3 or a 4. And it doesn't have an alarm clock. And I go to bed late and like wake up early. And the reason is that I'm motivated not by like some bullshit thing. I'm motivated fundamentally by a sense of purpose. And that's a blessing. Like that's an absolute gift, even when it's crushing, even when it's a heavy gift, it's still a gift. And my purpose is really easy. I'm supposed to eliminate as much suffering as I can. And I'm in a unique position to do a historic amount of that elimination of suffering. And so that's not because Lou is amazing or anything that is even remotely similar to that. It's because I am fortunate in that I find myself in a position where through a series of decisions and coincidences and other things, we are in a position to actually have the 4th multi-billion person impact on health. And so I'd be damned if I didn't, take a swing.
Let's talk. It opens up a whole bunch of different lines of questions for me. I mean, one of the things that you talked about was your friend who is now old and overweight and wants to ski. You don't talk about longevity, right? You're not talking about changing the lifespan and health span of people the way that others in this space are, but that's what you're fundamentally aiming for. The question I have is for your friend, if he knew that he was never going to have a heart attack, he was never going to come down with Parkinson's, he wasn't going to get dementia or Alzheimer's, how do you think that would change his view of his lifespan? And like, he's going to put off doing what he loves for 20 years. And if he's in his 70s when he's doing it, or in his 60s, and he's on the back nine, it changes his view. But if he realizes that his lifespan is now 120 as opposed to 100 at most, or 80 most likely, how does that change his perception of his life? And for you, how does that change your perception of what you're trying to bring to the market? We're going off script, Lou.
So I don't really think about lifespan much. I think about health span a lot. So how does it change his perspective? I'm going to be a cynical person in this, which is a realist in this moment, and that means he'd probably work an extra 10 or 15 years. That's a mentality issue. That's a mindset issue. That's a different thing. It's like I might have to take my phone calls from a restaurant in a back room, but it's still at the tallest restaurant in North America, and I still got to ski to get there. So the point is that
that's a great restaurant, by the way.
It's a great restaurant. And so it's Alpino Vino. And so the point is, like, I like to try to incorporate as much of living in my life as I can. So like you saw just now Felix come in, our 2-year-old, and Felix is here because he wanted to go on a trip with mom and dad, even though we're going to be in 7 or 8 places in 3 days, right? And we don't get to hang out with him all day because, I'm here and he would be bored. But he's allowed to hang out here all day, even though I'm here and he would be bored. And so he gets to cruise around the whole townhouse, do whatever he wants, like open doors, find stuff, and that's what he's doing. It's like kind of funny. And I know the front door is locked, so he can't get out, he can't reach it, it'll be fine. So he's like kind of trapped in the building. Now, other parents would say, what about the electrical plugs and other things? And I'm pretty sure that we've trained him about that, so he's gonna be fine. But yeah, it's about incorporating life. One of the things that that's a lesson that I'm working with my own wife, and how that incorporates into my life is that initially, because of her background, I think she felt like anything that was pleasure was bad, and suffering all the time was the way that you knew you were working. And I've tried to find a way where it's a little bit softer than that, and it's not perfect. There's stress all the time. I mean, we just announced that we're planning on deregistering and delisting and all of these other things.
We're going to get to that.
So there's stress all the time.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a different way of approaching it, depending on, I think you can approach it, you can approach it with a different mindset, and then it's not suffering, then it's interesting, right?
Let's talk about economics of vaccines for a second. The cost of making vaccines, the way you were describing it, the eggs and the biological research are unbelievably expensive. And then the way that vaccines are reimbursed at the government level are also incredibly expensive. If you were going to do an apples to apples comparison, like if I was one of the big 2 or 3 global biologic pharma firms out there, how much would it cost them to create and develop a vaccine to treat Parkinson's? And for you, how are you looking at those costs?
Okay, so the answer, the kind of flippant answer is they can't develop vaccines that work, and that's the reason why they don't have any against endogenous targets. So what they would do instead is develop a monoclonal antibody, and they have against alpha-synuclein or against A beta or against tau, and they would administer that usually via IV on a every 2 week or every 1 month basis, depending on which drug it is, to look at whatever their protocols happen to be. And that drug would cost, the drug product itself would cost $30,000 a year. Administering it would cost another 40 to 50 because you have to go to an IV clinic. There has to be a nurse. There's a bunch of things. So just call it just under 100. Then the time is 3 hours to 4 hours per infusion visit. So it's a cumbersome thing. and it's not currently fully reimbursed. So you wouldn't be reimbursed for it. That's out of pocket, and it would be annual. The other problem is that depending on the drug, again, 15 to 35% of the patients on those drugs suffer ARIA-E, which is a drug-induced brain swelling, which is not cool, like not something you want. Drug-induced brain swelling. They call it ARIA-E, which sounds much better than drug-induced brain swelling. I would make up something too and call it that. So that's what you get. It's a very specific type of edema. So when that happens, these people have to be taken off drug. And then you do something called titrating, which means you give them a smaller amount and you scale that up over time, and then they're back on drug. Now, interestingly, our drug, our vaccine product, or our active immunotherapy naturally titrates to its highest titers. So it naturally goes up slower because the body is making it, right? Making those antibodies. So you have that safety built in.
Because it's the synthetic peptide versus the actual attenuated biologic, right? I mean,
okay, so in this instance, there is no attenuated one. You can only do that live attenuated stuff with viruses.
Okay.
So that doesn't, so with these proteins, they have a monoclonal, they make antibodies in a giant vat, in a giant bioreactor, in a factory that costs $1 billion to serve 1 million patients with one drug a year. Okay? So extremely capital intensive. To make those, they grow these antibodies, and then they inject a shitload of them into you at one time, a bolus of antibodies, okay? Which is way more than you need by definition. Those have a half-life. As they drop to an effective shelf, you get boosted, and that takes them all the way back to the top. So because you have the highest dose of them that you would ever have, because you just got infused with them, right? So you go and you get infused again, and then the half-life goes down and down and down and down, okay? What we do is our body naturally and gradually creates the antibodies, and then we just keep them at a threshold. So we don't have the violent spikes up and down, which is a lot better for a number of reasons. I think it is the reason that we seem to get significantly more antibodies across the blood-brain barrier than monoclonal antibodies. I think comes from 2 reasons. It's from that spiking component, because you wouldn't siphon a car that way. That's not how you do that. So the body probably doesn't like that. You would rather like smooth, and then it's flowing. And I think that's the way that the vaccines naturally work, because it's allowing the brilliance of the immune system to do its thing.
Most vaccines require boosters, right? Whether it's every 6 months, it's a year, could be 5 years. Talk about how you're viewing the boosters, and then also talk about how you're going to deliver your vaccine.
Okay, so again, don't think of them as vaccines. Think of these as active immunotherapy medicines. The reason I say that is because with a monoclonal antibody, which are the current biologic treatments, right?
Yep.
They're boosting, or they're topping up, or they're re-medicating whenever they have to, based on that half-life, right? And for us, as a long-acting active immunotherapy, we might be boosting or providing bolus doses or priming again, on a quarterly or an every 6 month or an annual basis, depending on the disease. And what's cool about it is that it's super easy compared to these other drugs, because you're either going to be using an intramuscular injection, which you could do at a pharmacy or at your doctor's office, just like any COVID booster, or any other vaccine booster or any other treatment that is intramuscular. So very easy, same equipment, same locations, available around the world, et cetera. And then what I'm really excited about, and I've been working on for a really long time now, is the idea of delivering the drug via drone anywhere in the world through some type of self-application that's intradermal or subcutaneous.
A sticker.
But in this instance, it's a sticker. Yeah. And so.
What Lou is showing me, you can't see it here, is he's got this little small circle on his left hand between his thumb and his forefinger. It's probably about half the size of a dime, and it is the sticker.
It's the sticker, and the idea is that you can load these invisible intradermal needles with peptides. You can apply the sticker. There's no bleeding or anything like that. These are invisible, tiny, like smaller than a hair, kind of micro needles that go through just the surface of the skin and deliver the peptides below the skin level and the intradermal level. And the idea there is that these are both amazingly inexpensive, extremely easy to transport, absolutely available worldwide, and completely and totally light enough that you could apply this disruptive delivery mechanism to it. And these are not the things of fantasy. One of the things that I'm extremely grateful for Bezos's thought leadership was what he did with the FDA in terms of allowing prescription drugs to be delivered over the mail system. I think that particularly for rural America, that was a highly disruptive thing that helped, millions and millions of people. And it also paves the way for the ability for these vaccines to be delivered via drone, via mail, via post, and really go directly to the consumer via obviously their telehealth prescriber or their doctor. But I see that as a future that actually enables health to pretty much everyone, which is
well, and the idea of drone delivery, if you're in sub-Saharan Africa, it's not easy to get to a pharmacy, but everybody has a cell phone. Everybody has a cell phone. And, through GPS location, you could have the drone find the cell phone and deliver them their own their own active immunotherapy patch or sticker, or their families. It's not that difficult. And as sadly, as we've seen what's going on in the Ukraine and in Israel, drones have now the ability to go hundreds of kilometers, not hundreds of meters, but hundreds of kilometers. So the thesis of having this global network of drones delivering these therapies is much more realistic today. And tomorrow, literally tomorrow, it's even more realistic. It costs on average a couple of $1 billion usually to bring any type of drug to market, going through the FDA process of doing that. Vaxxinity went public a few years ago, had a very high valuation, and now it's not highly valued. You mentioned a few minutes ago that you're going through the process of deregistering and delisting. Talk to me about why, how, and what your plans are from a financial perspective, because usually public companies like yours use the capital markets, the public markets, to raise money to take them through, commercialization. You have a very different vision for all of this. So it's a big question. It's a lot of thoughts.
Well, okay, so let's start with the first one. $2 billion to make a drug. So that's an accurate number. That's industry reported number. That seems to be broadly accurate. Let me tell you what Vaxxinity did and put it in context with COVID. So we raised $250 million that we applied to COVID, and we made the world's safest, broadest coverage, and most efficacious vaccine. That'll be approved this year. COVID's gone. It was a pandemic. It's a thing. But ultimately we did make, the science worked, and it worked the whole time. So it was ready before the other ones, and we just didn't happen to get picked into Warp Speed or whatever. And there was things.
And you got no money from Warp Speed either.
We got no money from the government now. So we made a better, safer vaccine and we got an FDA approval for an antibody test for COVID. And we put 4 other programs into the clinic, including historic Parkinson's data, where we are the first product ever that has engaged toxic alpha-synuclein via biomarker and have symptomatically reversed a significant number of the patients. And both of those numbers are statistically significant.
Can we pause for a second there?
Yeah.
Couple things. One, this is going to come out after Nature. and after time. So you can say whatever you want here. But what you just said was you reversed in patients. Can you take a moment and explain what you mean there?
Yeah. What I mean is that we developed an assay, the first semi-quantitative assay for toxic alpha-synuclein with Michael J. Fox Foundation, Mayo Clinic, UT Health, and a diagnostic company called Amprion. And the end result of that in humans with Parkinson's, so in Parkinson's patients, was that we statistically significantly reduce the toxic alpha-synuclein, and that's measured by a seeding assay there, or spreading assay. And more importantly, we see also a very statistically significant improvement in UPDRS2, which are the tasks of living, right? The clinical endpoint, the tasks of everyday living. And the largest improvement we saw in that was the ability to communicate. So one of the things that happens with Parkinson's patients is that they get frozen, or their faces freeze, but usually it's their whole body later in the disease, and that could last seconds or minutes. And it inhibits conversation, and it inhibits the part that makes us fundamentally human, which is communicating our thoughts, right, effectively. And so that's a major elimination of suffering. And so that's what I mean when I say, I would say improvement, statistically significant improvement.
And this was a phase 1 trial. I mean, phase 1 trials are really like, you take the drug, it's not going to kill you.
That's what they're for. And so this is serendipitous, you know? A lot of times you don't even do them in patients, you just do them in healthy volunteers. So I think of this as kind of a 1B. The 1A was in just healthy volunteers. And the end result is that it you know, there seems to be a drug effect that is strong enough that you see it even this early and with such a small number of patients. And, you know, statistically significant, the reason that exists is because it does account for the number of patients as well. People always like to jump on that immediately, but it's the statistical significance accounts for that. So I think that what we see is, you know, a really positive potential drug effect that have to continue to explore, right? Like, and we have an ongoing trial right now using the same drug with Horatio Kaufman here at NYU in New York, and we're, you know, in the process of contemplating actually expanding the MSA cohort in that trial right now. I'm, you know,
so the data here is unbelievable, right? I mean,
yeah, it's very clean.
It is the underlying, what it indicates is
and
something.
You saw what we announced last week, right? At that conference, whatever the conference was.
Yes.
We're the only company, and this is an N of 1. So this is one patient in our trial. So 1 out of 17 or whatever. And the reason it matters is that this person went from detectable levels of toxic alpha-synuclein to completely undetectable levels of toxic alpha-synuclein.
Which means what? What does the alpha-synuclein mean?
So Parkinson's, MSA, Lewy body dementia, these are alpha-synucleinopathies. So the diseases are driven at least significantly by the presence of toxic alpha-synuclein. So there are a number of biomarkers that have been developed by other companies as well, not primarily us, that test for these toxic alpha-synuclein species. That's one of, like, the skin test for Parkinson's. Yeah. That's a toxic alpha-synucleinopathy test, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So our test is a blood test, and we used a number of these, right? But the test that is widely recognized as a diagnostic for whether you have or do not have toxic alpha-synuclein, a patient went from being positive on that test at the beginning to negative.
Unbelievable.
Which is it's a big deal. And now what does that mean for and he was one of the patients that also showed the improvement in the UPDRS2.
So you would think that for a public company, you would be able to use this to go out and raise money. right? Like we have this unbelievably positive result.
That's the way the system is supposed to work.
But you, Mei Mei, and the board of Vaxxinity said, we're going to take our football and go home. You're going to delist and deregister. You are trading, as of this recording, you're trading on the NASDAQ. By the time this recording comes out, you will no longer be trading on the NASDAQ. Why did you make this decision to fundamentally change the structure of your company from a capital markets perspective?
Okay, so the idea is that the board looked at this, right? And after really thinking about it, I'll tell you how it came up, and I'll give you like 3 thought points. The first one is that if you look at what's happened in the biotech market since we listed, we have had 3 consecutive just shitbagger years, just unbelievable, historically bad years for biotech, particularly non-revenue biotech. Now, why have the stock prices been punished to this extreme? And I mean across the board, not just us. And the answer is fucking assholes. Like it's the dickheads at hedge funds. It's a systematic and illegal, corrupt, totally fucked up thing from the #1 funders of lobbyists in the fucking world, which are hedge funds, which their job is to make money, and they have somehow miraculously, which only applies to hedge funds, the lowest tax rate in the fucking country, right? It's miraculous how well that correlates, right? Now, I'm not ultimately against hedge funds. I do think that short selling should be illegal because I think that the way that it's structured is fundamentally taken advantage of. So I don't think it's a clean system. And I think that leaves a lot of noise. Now, I don't give a shit, right? Like it's fine with me. Like I just don't think it's like, I tell my kids, you can sell heroin on the street, but you can't be a fucking short seller. And I really mean it. Like you could be a dictator, you could eat people's faces, you could be a cannibal, but you cannot be a short seller. Right? One's individual decisions that affect a small number, excellent. One's individual decisions that affect the productivity of a world, not okay. So be a cannibal, don't be a short seller. I should make that as a shirt for the
That
kids.
would be a great shirt.
It's a great shirt.
And wear it down to the NASDAQ
yeah,
or
exactly.
to the New York Stock Exchange.
It's just such a gross
Or just
life.
send it to Ken Griffin.
Yeah, it's just a gross life. So it's like, I don't care how much money they make.
Betting against a company to succeed.
They're just gross. It's a gross thing. The concept of it is gross. The idea of betting against innovation and growth so that you can make a little bit of money scamming a system is gross. So I think of it as fundamentally petty. So they're small people, and that's okay. But
I'm a small person.
Hey now, but for me, like I don't mind, right? Like these are things that I realize are flaws in the system that I think affect productivity, and that's an answer to your question that's accurate. That being said, I don't give a shit, right? And the reason I don't give a shit is because fundamentally what we're doing is so big and so disruptive that you have to have access to capital. The public markets were not providing that access to capital because that system for biotechs that are pre-revenue at the moment has been broken. And it'll be fixed, it'll come back, things bounce back, the market conditions could change, the evaluation could change, it could be a great decision to be public sometime in the future, any of those things could happen. But as of today, as of right now, the cost and the burden in terms of time, money, booty, all of the things, it's like there's no reason to be doing that, right? And there's no reason to be subject to it when there is no benefit that's the traditional benefit associated with that cost. So if you assess it from the board's perspective, which is trying to look at the what does a biotech fundamentally need that's pre-revenue? They need money to fund their R&D, right? And so anything that's contrary to that need, you shouldn't be doing. And the private markets, I believe, are significantly where the capital that's on the sidelines is. I also believe that it's where, with a vision and with the data that we have, we'll be able to realize both additional support and a better reflection of our value. So I think those are kind of the primary drivers of that decision.
A few months ago, I introduced you to MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. they have a very similar thesis of trying to limit global suffering, but in the mental health space through the use of MDMA therapy for PTSD, and then all psychedelics. They're structured as a B Corp. And I think when you met Chris Lotlicker from there, it set off a light bulb in your head to figure out how to restructure your company, because B Corps allow you to do different things than S Corps, C Corps, and other traditional corporate structures. What are you thinking for Vaxxinity from a B Corp perspective?
Yeah, the basic thought for the B Corp, and the way that one of the ways that Maps and Rick and Chris got there, I think, was with the advice of a friend of ours, Martine Rothblatt, who did the same thing for United Therapeutics, and it was harder because it was already public. So that's a tough. It's a big lift. She did a great job, and so I respect the shit out of that. And I've thought about it. And when I talked to Martine about it, she said, because you guys managed to list as a controlled company, there really isn't a distinct benefit. Now, she's in primarily orphan indications, right? So I think she's right with that assessment. Over the last 2 years, and specifically over the last 6 months, now that we're focused almost exclusively on running the world's first global prevention trial for Alzheimer's, the idea of how big that indication is and where that indication is around the world in terms of how dispersed it is, and how big meaning the cost and the number of people, made it clear that potentially a B Corp structure would be worth revisiting right away. And the reason is that if you know that you're going to start by defining this as the first ever time that you have a direct negotiation, pre-agreement with the payer systems of major countries, where your primary goal in those negotiations is to give access and grant access to the drug, that opens a tremendous amount of exposure from potential shareholder lawsuits and other bullshit from people that don't think you're charging the most you possibly could, right? And that's a flawed business assumption on their part as well, because I think you can do well by doing good. But so I think that the volume makes up for the price point and access, and so you eliminate more suffering. But that, because that's fundamentally disruptive, and because that could be perceived as not charging as much as you possibly could, that's a risk. And so why keep that risk if the intention of the company is so clear, right? And the intention of the bulk of the shareholders and the board is so clear. So we're going to do two things, and that's happening now, or as soon as it can happen. Which will be moving it to Texas and incorporating in Texas, reincorporating in Texas, and making it a B Corp in Texas, and potentially changing the name so that and this is something that is currently under debate, but potentially changing the name to better represent the disruptive nature of the technology and kind of get away from the overhang of the concept of vaccines. So
I know we're both towards the end of our time. And first of all, Lou, I'm really grateful. I'm grateful for everything that you and I are getting to do together. I mean, this has been an important relationship for me to develop with you, and I'm like I said, I'm really grateful. I want to talk about the Army of Compassion. One of the things you just said was talking about negotiating with national or global health payer systems, right? Can you describe what the Army of Compassion is, and then also describe the role that former Governor David Beasley will have in it?
Yeah, so the Army of Compassion is the global prevention of Alzheimer's trial. So this is tens of thousands of patients, and it's truly a historic trial. The other component of that that's really important is that we're working with governments, national health systems, payer systems, to pre-negotiate access so that the price of the drugs and the accessibility and reimbursement of the drugs are defined. And that avoids situations where, like you see with pharma, they sit around a table and try to talk about how much they can charge for the drug without getting in trouble. We sit around the table and talk about how little we can charge for the drug. So the idea here is really focusing on access. So it'll be the first time that there's been public-private partnership around a global number one cost to the global healthcare system. It'll also be the first time where the companies, the private-public partnership is ensuring that there's access.
And Governor Beasley ran, so Governor Beasley ran the World Food Program, and he won a Nobel Peace Prize for the work he did with the World Food Program. How does what he did with that program translate to what he's going to be doing with you?
I'm humbled and extremely fortunate and grateful for the people that come into my life. Yourself included.
Thank you.
The team, the Peter,
That's Peter Diamandis.
Yeah. Or in this case, Governor Beasley, the Governor Beasley fed 180 million people a day. And the one thing that I know about him and that we share in common is a desire to help even more. And so, this is the only thing that I can think of that can affect billions of people. And I like to tell the kids, I don't get out of bed for millions of people and billions of dollars. The types of problems I like to get out of bed to solve affect billions of people and trillions of dollars to the spend. And those are ways that we can, that's me doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Because anything less than that, I'm being taken off course, right? Anything smaller than that as my primary driver is a waste of the resources and the place that I've been privileged enough to land at, right? And so I don't want to I didn't rip off my fingernails on the climb up this mountain so that I didn't get to the top of it, right? So the idea here is, how do you have that impact? How do you know that you get there? How do you know that suffering is eliminated? And that's a big burden. It's a huge burden, but it's also a tremendous privilege. I was talking to John Simon the other day, the chairman of GSK, and he's also the chairman of Protos, the group that's running our trial in the UK. And I said, John, think of how cool this is. We're sitting here talking about affecting billions of people potentially, going after the number one largest thing that's costing the healthcare system's money as our first one. And we're not even crazy. In other words, this is something we can actually do. And he's like, it's amazing, isn't it? He's like, it's amazing to think about it. And it's like, yeah. And he was the chairman of HSBC before that, which is a bank, which is funny. And so, but he's a nice guy. He's a keeper. He's like a solid, global thinker on human health. And so the solid global thinker component is what I was attracted to. And that's why we're gonna have dinner next time I'm in the UK, and he'll come up. He wanted to support the Army of Compassion any way he can, so he'll jump on too. But Governor Beasley is uniquely positioned to be the spokesperson for what we're doing. And it doesn't mean he's going to operate it, because, God knows he's had to operate enough things. It's like he's had plenty of operating. But being the fact that he sees what we're doing for what it is, which is pure and really pursuing the right things for the right reasons, I believe. And the fact that we can do that at that level and at that scale, that combination is really disruptive. So So, like I said, I'm blessed for the support and the friends that I've got. Wouldn't be here without any of that. Like I tell everybody all the time, Lou on his own is a crazy person on the streets, like screaming at traffic, right? But with a team, it's amazing what you can direct that to do. You can actually affect billions of lives. You can actually affect trillions of dollars of savings. You can actually have, one of, if not the largest impact on human suffering of anybody in the modern era. Like, what else are we supposed to be doing?
And that is a phenomenal place to stop. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lou.